Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson, and we have a fascinating guest today talking about something that has been of great interest of mine lately, and that is the American family and the attacks that are occurring on the American family. We have Conn Carroll with us today, and if you've been reading the Washington Examiner, you know exactly who he is. He just wrote a new book entitled Sex and the Citizen: How the Assault on Marriage is Destroying Democracy. Obviously something that's very timely in American culture right now. He's a commentary editor at the Washington Examiner, a graduate of the Antonin Scalia School of Law at George Mason University, and previously served as a communications director in the United States Senate for 7 years before returning to journalism. And it's nice to know that there are still some people in journalism who actually understand the purpose of journalism and understand that there was a reason that the press is the only business entity protected by our Constitution, because they're supposed to disseminate unbiased information to the people so that the people can decide which way they want to go. But they can't do that if you have the press putting not only their thumb but their foot on the scale, which we have seen recently. Fortunately, the people recently rejected the narrative that the press has put forth. But we have some very good press people. And Conn, thank you and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's truly an honor to be here.
Well, I want to go back to the family and the concern that we all have of what's happening to the family. You know, it's interesting. You can turn the television on, and within 5 minutes, they introduce some alternative to the traditional nuclear family, not only as acceptable, but maybe even as preferable. And it's kind of difficult to even remember what traditional American values are. So let me ask you to start. Why did you write this book?
It actually stems from my time when I was with the Senate. I was with Senator Mike Lee. He was the Joint Economic Committee chairman, which normally looks after kind of like gross domestic product and employment rates and things like that. But he wanted to take it in a new direction. And he wanted to look at social capital. So your listeners may have heard of actually a Harvard professor named Robert Putnam, and he wrote a book called Bowling Alone, which looked at the decline of civil society in America. And so what the committee really found out is that a lot of the decline in civil society, in clubs, in organizations like the Boy Scouts, volunteer organizations, was driven by the decline of marriage. And so I'd already known there was this body of research out there about how productive and valuable marriage was, not only to the people involved, the husbands and wives, but also to the children and the communities at large. But I never really knew just how deep the literature went, and how even many people that you would otherwise be on the left, kind of understood and acknowledged this body of knowledge. And so at that point, I decided I wanted to read like a really good history of marriage. And so I went on Amazon and I started looking, and, everything on the conservative side was focused on gay marriage. And I don't want to say that that's not important,
Sure.
But I think it just obscures the larger story of how far back marriage goes and how important it is to the foundation of humanity itself, not just civilization, but humanity itself. And then, of course, everything on the left was just terrible and wrong. So from there, what the book actually is me writing the book that I wanted to read, just doing the research, going back and starting really from the dawn of humanity and looking at the how marriage has always been with us. It's part of what makes us human, but how it has changed over the ages, and how some of those changes were bad, some of those changes were good. But then how in the United States today, starting really in the late 60s, early 70s, marriage has fallen apart, and how much that has really hurt everyone.
Absolutely. Well, in the book, you mentioned the book 5 of Plato's Republic. And what was it that Socrates thought was the ideal city state.
Right. So, you see this, as an ideal. I mean, it's really more of a thought experiment for him, but it becomes like the actual ideal version of society for the communists, in the sense that they thought that everyone should have sex with everyone else, and that no one should know whose children was whom, and that the children should be raised communally, and that there should be no nuclear family. And of course, this was not what Greek society was like, or
Right.
even what's occurs afterwards. But you then end up having Marx and Engels actually adopting this framework as their ideal. And as I detail in the book, they actually thought that was humanity's origin. So there was actually the birth of kind of anthropology was happening right when Marx and Engels were writing. And there was this American anthropologist named Henry Lewis Morgan, who was actually studying the Iroquois at the time. And the Iroquois were monogamous, but the language that they used, how they referred to aunts and uncles, brothers, sisters, like that, everyone kind of had the same name. And so when he discovered that other languages around the world also used that same nomenclature, he thought that there must have been some episode in the past where there was no nuclear family, and that people just made it promiscuously. He ended up being wrong, but that was his theory at the time, and Marx and Engels adopted it. And so they believed that by getting rid of the nuclear family, humanity could return to its kind of more natural, idyllic state. But they were just wrong on the science. And of course, we've seen centuries of human misery ever since.
Well, it certainly seems like Marxian ideals have been embraced by Hollywood and the entertainment industry.
For many decades, unfortunately.
Is it the new normal, do you think?
Oh, I hope not. I mean, on some level it is, yes and no. So, when you look at, the actual lives of, not necessarily Hollywood actors and actresses, but of the producers and the bigwigs, they're actually mostly married. But the values they project, right? This is the kind of the hypocrisy of a lot of elite liberals, is that they themselves practice a life of monogamy, but then they go out and preach promiscuity and sex and all that for everyone else. And unfortunately, for certain communities, that has become the norm. So, as I talk about in the book, up until 1960s, young African Americans were actually more likely to be married than their white counterparts. Okay. But then, as I detailed in the book, there was a series of Supreme Court cases that kind of undermined family law and got rid of what are called man in the house rules. And so after that, you had the marriage penalties of the welfare state, and the bottom just falls out of the African American family in the 70s. And unfortunately, that's then spread to other communities. So, it's not just, poor African American families where you don't have fathers in the home anymore. Now it's Latino families. Now it's white families, and up to a quarter of white children now are born out of wedlock.
Yeah.
Which is the same rate as it was in the 1960s for African Americans. So unfortunately, the dysfunction we saw that first showed up in the Black family has then expanded to other families, and unfortunately, it has become a norm for far too many of our communities. And the entire point of my book is that we can and should turn that around.
If we were smart, we would observe what happened in the Black community, see that it's happening to the broader community now, and take measures to stop the carnage.
Exactly.
If we were smart.
Right.
There's been the rise of the dinks, double income, no kids.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that's become so popular?
I think, for a lot of people, there's just a element of individual fulfillment. They don't have a larger sense of community and purpose. And I think, that is part of the story. But I think the larger part is, the dinks not getting married. So, a lot of people worry about natalism and the birth rate declining, and that's definitely a problem. But when you dig into the numbers, the real source of the birth dearth, of the declining fertility, is the decline of marriage. You have so many women that are not getting married at all. Single women have far fewer children than married women. And the numbers also point out that the earlier a woman gets married, the more children she ends up having. So I'm not so much worried about, couples that get married and don't have kids. I mean, there will be some of them that happens. It's the fact that marriages are happening less often and they're happening later. To me, that's the real problem. Is for a whole number of areas, and in the channeling of sexual activity is a big theme throughout the book. And so,
Right.
because government in the late 60s and early 70s basically gave up on using law to channel sexual activity through the institution of marriage, it has then normalized sex outside of it, and so that therefore has decreased the amount of marriages we see and how often they happen, which has harmed all of us.
No, I mean, I feel for the young people. If they watch a movie, the hero is jumping from bed to bed. I mean, there's no permanent relationships. And, that's the cool person. That's the one
Right.
that you want to emulate. And, kind of started with James Bond, and it's just exploded at this stage of the game. And anybody who thinks about a monogamous marriage as a young person, sometimes they're kind of ostracized, and it's really a difficult situation. But a lot
Yeah,
of the
I think it's gotten even worse with Disney and their new kind of princess movies. They used to unapologetically have these movies where the young female protagonist would find a male counterpart to have a romantic relationship with. But you look at the past movies, Brave, Moana, all of these, that never happens now. These
right,
these young protagonists, and you see in Star Wars as well. In the original trilogy, you had Han and Leia. Like that was a big source of dramatic tension in the movie, and it made them great. And then you have in the new prequels. No, I guess they are sequels. That's gone. There's no romantic relationship between any male and female, and it's like Disney's just trying to androgynize
yeah,
culture, and it's to no one's benefit because we are biological creatures who have sexes and who have desires, and you just can't ignore that without doing really real harm to people.
yeah. Speaking of biological creatures, isn't it interesting that a lot of the creatures in the animal world mate for life?
Yeah, I mean, I touch on that in a book. So there are a number of creatures that mate for life, but when you look at the numbers, actually, we do it best. So for decades, almost hundreds of years, not people, scientists assumed that most birds were monogamous, if not for life, then at least for mating season. But then they came along and they were able to do finally DNA tests when that technology became available. And they were surprised at how high the number of non-parental children there were in the bird evolution community. And so what the difference is that humans have a cultural norm that helps police monogamous societies and cultures and expectation, and birds don't have that. So if you're a male bird, the only way you can stop another male bird from coming in is actually physically being there at the nest and keeping them away. Whereas with humans, we judge each other, we keep tabs on each other, we gossip. If someone's stepping out on someone, we're going to find out, and you're going to be not necessarily punished, but people are going to find out about it. And so it's these larger checks on community behavior, these cultural norms that make humans the most monogamous creature on earth. And so when you look at the DNA of human children, it almost always is when they are married, because of course, there's so many that are born outside of marriage. But for those that are still born within marriage,
Right,
very, very few are non-paternal births,
right.
and we really we lead the world in that.
Well, one area of some concern is the fact that a lot of young women now are critical of the patriarchal society. And there are a lot more women graduating from college now than there are men, which means that going down the road here, we're going to have a lot more women bosses and people who own things. How do you think that affects family relationships?
Sure. Well, let me break that into two because women definitely are, sensitive to ideas of the patriarchy, and they feel as though they're very much against that. But one of my major themes of the book, and this is how the book begins, is I begin with Andrew Tate, because Andrew Tate is this misogynist, very patriarchal. But what a lot of people don't realize is that marriage itself, and when I say marriage, I mean monogamous marriage. Monogamous marriage was created not to control women, but to control the Andrew Tates of the world. Okay. It is meant to control men who want to exist outside of marriage and have sex with as many women as possible. That is how the institution was formed and created and has worked over time to be a democratic equalizing force. So if you're against, clan-based, patriarchal, polygamous, men are all powerful societies, then monogamous marriage is the institution that is best going to do that and is best for you. Now, as far as switching gears a little to women becoming more educated, more economically independent, that is all true, and I think that's good. What is driving the decline of marriage is not that women are more economically independent; it's that men are becoming less marriageable. So when you look at where marriage has fallen the least, it's in those same exact areas where men are suffering economically. So, yes, wages overall have gone up since the 1950s and 60s. They've gone way up for women. They've gone way up for college educated men. But then when you look at non-college educated men, particularly men with only a high school education, wages are actually down. Okay. And then you, on top of that, pile on a welfare system that punishes working class people for getting married. That says you can have Medicaid, food stamps, housing, all these benefits, but as soon as you get married, we'll take them away. And
Right.
so that is what is pushing working class women away from working class men. And that's the problem we need to fix is we need to make working class men marriageable. We need to cut immigration so their wages are not being cutted. We need to make sure we have free trade so that the Chinese aren't undercutting their jobs with low cost goods overseas. We need to make housing more affordable for everyone. We need to make sure that men can be protectors and providers for women, because even the most independent, wealthy, educated, great woman, she still wants a man to provide and protect for her.
Sure.
It's just within her. And the problem is we're just not producing enough of those men. And it's a problem that cycles on itself, because once you have a generation where there are no fathers in the household, it is boys and men in particular that then suffer in the next generation.
Right.
This is especially true for Black families. It is the young Black children, that's the young Black boys that suffer the most when they don't have a father in the home. As I write in the book, there's nothing wrong with young Black boys in this country that can't be fixed by more married fathers in the home. Mm-hmm. So if we're able to, stop that cycle, get more married fathers into homes of all races, then we'll have a better crop of more marriageable men in the next cycle, so that those strong independent women can have strong independent men that are attracted to them and they want to form partnerships with.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, the government has stepped in and taken the place of the father in many cases.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have a whole chapter called Married to the State, where I detail how the government has not only provided an option for, not having a husband, but is even pushing women into that area, saying, look, if you choose a husband, then you're going to lose all these benefits. So it's even worse than a lot of people think.
I was rather surprised when I became the Secretary of HUD. I said, self-sufficiency programs, this is going to be a slam dunk. Everybody's going to be in favor of that. Boy, there were many people on the other side of the aisle who do not want people to be independent. They love having them subject to the government. And that really is sort of antithetical to the founding principles of our country and why
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
worked so hard to maintain individual freedoms and independence. And I think a lot of people, until very recently, like in the recent election, didn't realize that. But I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that there is something very special about our country, our values, our principles, including our family values. And it's, my sincere hope that we will come back to a reasonable state. You know, a young person today who's thinking about getting married, obviously, uh, they need to get into the dating scene. A lot of people are concerned about the dating scene. They say things have changed. Do you have any recommendations for a young person who wants a strong monogamous marriage?
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I would want to speak to two different audiences here. I think it's kind of different messages for both kind of men and women here. For the young men, I would say, um, make yourself as desirable possible. There's this online set of kind of men who feel that sex is owed to them, or love is owed to them, and it's not. Um, you know, no one owes you anything, especially love. If you want to be loved, you must make yourself lovable.
Mm-hmm.
So, that includes both going to school, learning, or doesn't have to be college or higher education, but learn a trade, learn a skill, get yourself in the gym. Chicks still dig, upper body strength. It's just a biological fact. So to make yourself, attractive as best you can. And then in the words of, Mike Leach, the Texas Tech football coach, you got to swing your sword. A lot of men are scared to go up and ask women out, and that's you got to do it. You can't just hang out with women and hope things happen. You got to go out there and say, hey, I'm interested in you. Do you want to go out to coffee or dinner or a movie? I think there's this idea that women don't want to go on traditional dates. It's wrong. Women love being courted. They love being made to feel special and desired. And so, find a woman you're attractive to. If you think she's attracted to you back, take a chance. Rejection's going to happen. It hurts, but the reward of finding someone else who wants to go on adventures with you, go to movies, have dinner, and building a relationship with them is amazing.
Book of Proverbs, the 27th chapter, the 5th verse says, open rebuke is better than secret love.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, it's better to better know where you stand. So roll the dice, take the chance, ask or go out. For young women, you know, especially in the light of this election, right? So I don't know if you follow this, but there's this 4B movement, which I guess is coming out of Korea. But the B is the beginning of the Korean word for no. But basically, it's a movement that says women should reject dating, sex, marriage, and kids. And it's being adopted by a lot of Democrat Kamala Harris voters who are bitter. But this predates that in the sense that there's polling which shows that of every demographic, the demographic most willing to or most likely to cut someone out of their life or not date someone because of political views are educated women, or specifically white educated women. And so my simple advice would be, don't be so close-minded. Just because someone's a Trump voter or has conservative ideas or values, don't cut them out of their life. Give them a chance.
Communication.
There's a growing gender gap politically, and there's probably a lot of young women out there who's like, oh my, I could never even talk to or date a Trump voter. And I would just advise them, give them a chance. Go on that first date. You may hate them, great, but maybe not. Maybe other than politics, you guys share a whole lot of other passions, or cooking, or hiking, or sports teams, or Jane Austen books. I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff people can connect on that's
Exactly.
not politics. So just try to be open minded and give a guy a chance.
It's a good point. You know, if you take the most radical right wing person and the most radical left wing person, they probably agree on 80% of stuff. But
Right, exactly.
we let the 20% be magnified and exacerbated until they think they hate each other. And
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's actually literature on this that shows, the more women involve themselves with men, get married, have kids, the kind of the more conservative they come, the more they can understand each other. And I think, women are never going to change men's minds by shutting them out.
well, I want to ask you about divorce.
Okay.
And divorce rate seems to be pretty bad these days. And does a wife making more money than her husband contribute to that?
The literature says if she is making more than the husband, yes, it does make it more likely. Um, but the larger kind of issue here is no fault divorce is the idea that women can just drop men at the schedule hat. One bit in the book that a lot of people find interesting is actually comes from data that we have only because same-sex marriage is legal in this country and in other countries. Is that if you look at the divorce rates of gay male couples, they actually get divorced the least. Next is straight couples. Straight couples are in the middle. But you know who gets divorced the most is lesbian couples. And so the thinking is here is that women just have a very high standard when it comes to their emotional needs, to their who their chosen emotional partner is. And so, when you have a lot of women say, oh, it's just men are the problem. If men were better, then there'd be no divorce. It's like, well, we have a picture of what a world of no men would look like, and divorce is worse. So I'm not saying, women are necessarily the problem here. It's definitely an area where men need to learn how to communicate better as well. But, you know, divorce has always been with us. As long as there has been marriage, there has been divorce. Of course, when you look at the Old Testament, you could get either side could just say, I'm no longer married to you. They were divorced like that. In Roman society, divorces were very easy. All a woman had to do was get her father's, not her husband's permission to get married or to get divorced. And even with Christianity in the Catholic Church, you have annulments and other things that have allowed to kind of move on from marriage. But you know, it can't be too easy to get a divorce. There should definitely always be a way out, but it can't be too easy because when it becomes too easy to exit, then the bond itself is weakened. And there actually is data on this showing that particularly for the exact demographic where marriage is weakest, for low skilled men, those men become less likely to get married in states and regimes where it's easier to get divorced
Right.
because they know that it's just not as good as an economic bargain for them. And so I do think we need to address that. Absolutely.
Well, in 1963, Congressman Herlong from Florida read into the congressional record the 45 goals of communism in America. One of them was to gain control of Hollywood and the media so that you could actually change the culture in America. Now, last year, you may remember the case of Harrison Butker, the kicker
The
for,
Chiefs, yes.
yeah, and the outrage that he caused by just talking about traditional family values. Have we changed that much?
Oh, I mean, the short answer is yes, right? I mean, I think we touched on this earlier with kind of Disney. I mean, if you go back to the movies of the 80s and 90s, it was a lot of the movies were focused around a romantic storyline of a one man, one woman. And when you look at the movies of today, we've definitely lost that. And I think it is just a wokeness which has driven a lot of people down an unhappy path. Because when you look at on the data on who's the most happiest, it's married people. But of those married people who are happy, the happiest are those that are in that are conservative and religious as well. So the farther we get away from committed, lifelong, monogamous marriage, the unhappier people are.
But the good thing is, it's always darkest before the dawn. And sometimes it has to get pretty dark before people see the light. And one of the things that was somewhat encouraging about this recent election we went through is 70% of people think we're on the wrong track, that we're moving in the wrong direction, as we're throwing away our values and the things that were traditional things that happened in this country. We're sort of like floating without directions, a boat that just is going wherever the waves are taking it. And it's not a good place whatsoever.
Yeah, but I think there's also optimism. According to the exit polls, Donald Trump did not just win married white women; he won all married women. So among all married women of all demographics, Latino, Black, Hispanic, you put them together, Trump won married women. He also won married men, and he eked out a victory among unmarried men. So the only demographic that he lost was unmarried women, which, and this is unfortunate, which is also the fastest growing demographic. So if we don't get this right, if we don't fix this, if we don't reverse this decline in marriage, the unmarried women block will only grow, and it kind of feeds on itself.
And our population will keep decreasing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But on the bright side, we brought into the Trump coalition Latino men, and Latino men love monogamous marriage. they are on board. They love being providers and protectors, and they firmly believe the nuclear family is the foundation of civil society. So it is great to have them on board in the coalition, and of course we need to make larger inroads with them. But I do think a real pro-marriage agenda, pro-family agenda would solidify this new coalition that Trump has put together.
You talk a lot about historical things in the book. Before the fall of the Roman Empire, it seemed like marriages were falling apart too.
Yeah.
Was there, you think, a strong correlation there?
I do think some of the same issues were there, but also it was very different. So as I talk about in the book, Rome and Greece had a form of monogamy, but it was very different than the monogamy that we understand today. So Roman monogamy was unilateral monogamy. It was only enforced on women, only enforced on wives. If you were a Roman citizen, Roman male citizen, you were not only could have sex with whoever you wanted, as long as it wasn't another male citizen's wife. You were encouraged to have sex with as many other people as possible, concubines, mistresses, slaves, unfortunately young boys. This was all very common. The prostitution industry was very much legal and regulated, and of course taxed in Rome. And it was just assumed that men would have sex with whoever they wanted all the time. But Christianity changed all that. For the first time in human history, the focus was on a reciprocal understanding of monogamy, that both men and women had equal human dignity and they had equal obligations to each other. Right. And so you get the line in Corinthians that, the husband is the master of the wife, but the wife is also the master of the husband's body as well. That was truly unique, original, and it ended up changing the world. So, as I mentioned as I lay out in the book, the church really goes about trying to enforce this image of consent, mutuality within marriage. And in order to do this, they develop this family and marriage program. As that's not what they called it; it's what Joseph Heinrich, a professor at Harvard, calls it. And among this was, illegitimate children can't inherit property. no cousin marriages, which was kind of designed to stop arranged marriages, because a lot of times these patriarchal clans would try to keep wealth within the family through cousin marriages. So they got rid of the cousin marriages, and so by breaking up the patriarchal power structure, by instead of having one paterfamilias at the top that ruled over everyone, and instead of having each individual nuclear couple together having their own family, having their own power, that broke down the clan power structure and allowed a larger civil society to kind of swell up. So that's when you start getting guilds and universities and all these other, non-patriarchal, non-family structured entities that that created the kind of the framework, the foundation for both democracy and capitalism. And so that's why you have wealth and the alignment. All that happens in the Western world where Christianity, where monogamy is the strongest. And a lot of people don't understand that story.
Well, do you think the attacks on the American family, the breakdown of the American family, is intentional, or is it just the byproduct of not paying attention?
I think it's a little both. So, as I lay out in the book, I kind of place the beginning of the downfall of marriage, the beginning of the attack on marriage in France. No, it's so I talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's kind of really the first one that talked about this state of nature, fictional state of nature, but where man was kind of free from societal expectations, and that it was society that kind of came in and imposed limits on his freedom, and that therefore he needed to throw off the shackles of these societal cultural expectations. And then, of course, libertarians. John Stuart Mill was also along this fence. He talked about we needed to have allow for experiments of living, so that people could find their true selves. And he also saw not just government again, but cultural norms themselves as oppressive on individuals, when in actuality it's the exact opposite. It's those cultural norms, those monogamous norms that form the foundation of what we are to achieve as individuals. So this goes on, and then you start seeing, back to anthropology, you see kind of this growing cultural relativism. So there's this anthropology professor, David Boas, who starts talking about how all cultures are equal. No culture is better than the other. There's no, progressive between, barbarity to civilization.
Right.
And that takes hold in the American elite intelligentsia. And so, after the Civil War, there's this slew of Supreme Court cases where Congress is trying to crack down on polygamy in Utah. And so when you read these cases, this is a Supreme Court. And these are all in the book, People's Reason. This is a Supreme Court that understands that this is a Christian nation, and that Christianity is based on monogamous marriage unions, and that therefore Congress has every power and every right to come in and quash alternative lifestyles. Read these opinions. They're amazing. But then fast forward, 60, 70 years, and you start seeing first in dissenting opinions, but then of course later in majority opinions, that monogamy is just one option among many. That polygamy has been around just as long as monogamy, and so therefore it's equal. And so then by the 70s, you then have the Supreme Court saying that marriage doesn't matter at all. So there's the Supreme Court case that I talk about here is Eisenstadt v. Baird. So for many years, you had what I call this American family consensus that said that the state had the power to channel sexual desires through monogamous unions. And Griswold is actually a part of this American family consensus. Griswold said, the state can't regulate what a married couple does, but a state can regulate what single people do. And saying that, as long as a married couple is managing their sex life, they can do whatever they want. But single people can definitely be regulated. That's all changed in 1973 in Eisenstadt v. Baird. This is the first case that really says, no, there's a 14th Amendment individual right to contraception, to having all the different sexual lifestyles you want. And that's really the downfall of the American family consensus. And that's when the American family falls apart. And it's been downhill ever since.
Well, what role do you think the church has played in the downfall of the American family? I'm talking about the modern day woke churches, which kind of are antithetical to traditional Christian values.
Yeah, I mean, I'll plead ignorance there. I mean, I know some churches are definitely more conservative than others on this issue. And from my understanding, the more kind of woke a church is, the less they're attended in general. But what the literature does show is that of those people who do go to church and of those people who do practice a faith, they are more likely to be married, and those marriages are likely to be stronger, happier, and divorce is less likely. So, to the extent that there is a true believing faith out there, that is absolutely a strong ally for marriage.
And I think the Marxists understood that. And the 45 goals of communism in America that were read into the congressional record in 1963, one of them was to get into the churches and change the true gospel for the social gospel. And basically put your finger up in the air and see which way the wind is blowing, and make people feel good about whatever choices they've made. And as you mentioned, the lack of monogamous marriages that was rampant in society, and particularly in Roman society, was changed when the church came in with a real sense of values, traditional values, and it makes such a big difference. And, I'm very hopeful that people will kind of recognize that, there are two ways, the good way and a bad way. And the reason we have these fantastic brains is so that we can look at each of those ways and see what the results were, and make judgments. And, a lot of that kind of analysis does not seem to be going on anymore. And that's problematic. Now, I want to ask you, in terms of real solutions, is the horse too far out of the barn?
I'm an optimist. No, I don't think so. I think you can look at two things would say not. I'll start one far away. You look at Hungary. Hungary is a country that after the Berlin Wall fell, the marriage rate just fell, just completely collapsed, and then fertility along with it. But Viktor Orban has come along. They rewrote their entire constitution around marriage, and they're getting results. Their marriage rates have flipped. It's going up. Fertility is slowly recovering, not much as it is in not as much as fast as marriages, but I believe 10, 15 years from now, you'll see that I think that the fertility will recover along with marriage. Not that everything's perfect in Hungary. I think Orban's a little too cozy with China, but that's separate. I think you can have a pro-marriage agenda that doesn't involve selling out to China. But moving closer to home, just look at the United States military. So when the United States military got rid of the draft, they kind of made a strategic decision of like, okay, how are we going to keep people on board? And one of the things they decided to do was to benefit marriage. So within the Army, you get more housing allowance if you're married. And there's other, healthcare and all kinds of other benefits they have, including just a flat out monetary marriage bonus. And it's worked. The marriage rates are far much higher than they were before these programs were introduced within the military. And then marriage rates in military families compared to everyone else are just far much. You're far more likely to be married if you're a member of the military than not. So there are pro-marriage policies you can adopt that reverse the tide. But first principles, first we have to stop harming marriage. We touched on this a little earlier when we talked about all the welfare programs that punish marriage. Again, a lot of when you read liberals on this question, they'll say, welfare doesn't have marriage penalties because AFDC is such a small program and the dollar value has shrunk since 1980s. And that's all true. But what they conveniently leave out is all the other programs they've stocked on top of that, which also have marriage penalties. So Section 8 housing, Medicaid, food stamps, Obamacare, all of that has marriage penalties in it. Combined, state and local federal and local governments spend $1 trillion a year on programs that punish marriage. $1 trillion. So step one, we need to fix that. We need to stop spending $1 trillion every year punishing marriage. Then after that, we need to make more marriageable men. So that means, cutting low skill immigration. It means fixing our trade imbalances so we can build stuff again. It means fixing our permitting and environmental laws so that it doesn't take 26 years to get an environmental report for a high-speed train in California, so that the federal government doesn't spend $7 billion on electrical vehicles and has only built 7 in 2 years. That's all because of environmental laws that make it almost impossible to build things in the country. We need to reform that. We need to build stuff again. And because, building construction jobs, those are mostly male jobs, which pay money. And so we need to go down the road. We also need to look at our Social Security disability system, how that incentivizes men, to choose to stay home and not make themselves better. We need to look at the higher education system, move away from just sending everyone to college and send more people to trade school. So it's really an all-encompassing approach that says, look, if we're not getting young men and women together to get married and start families, then what are we even doing here? Right? What is the point of what we're trying to do if young men and women can't come together and start a family? Because that's why we're here.
And down the road,
right? If we're not, we're just not going to project ourselves into the future. We're just going to disappear. And so if we want to continue to exist, we need to solve this problem. We need to make sure that young men and women are incentivized and can come together, form new households, start helping each other, have kids, and become the strong foundation nuclear families that were that built this country and made it the best place on earth.
Well, also helping people to understand marriage.
Mm-hmm.
You take 2 different people from different environments who grew up differently, and you put them under the same roof 24/7. There's going to be friction. I always say it's like taking 2 pieces of sandpaper and rubbing them together. But what happens if you keep rubbing them? They become smooth. You just got to stay in there long enough for it to become smooth, for you to get to really know each other.
Yeah, that is one other thing I stress in the book, is that, I don't want to make it seem like marriage is easy. I don't want it to seem like, you say yes on your wedding day and it's all, puppies and rainbows. Love is work. Marriage is work. Marriage is accommodating, listening to, working with another person, being patient, forever. It's a 24/7 job. But while it is work, it's also great.
When it works, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Being in love, having a true, partner, spouse, husband, wife that understands you and you trust. It's the best feeling in the world.
Well, let me end by asking you, writing a book like this, obviously you go back and you do a lot of research, you got a lot of statistics, you see a lot of history. What did you learn while writing this book that gives you hope?
I guess what we just touched on is that when you look at like Hungary and the military and other places, is that the ship can be turned around. And I think one other finding that really was amazing to me was, again, out of Harvard, actually. Raj Chetty did this study on social mobility. Mm-hmm. And it looked at what factors in a neighborhood were most predictive of that next generation rising up the economic ladder.
Right.
And it wasn't that children within married homes were more successful, although they were. But it was that those neighborhoods that had the most married fathers in the homes, the boys in that neighborhood, whether or not they had a father in their home themselves, were then more likely to be successful in the next generation. Mm-hmm. So that, and this touched me. I lost my father when I was young, is that, having a father in the home is important. But even more important is that when because of death, divorce, whatever reason, there's not a father in the home, what single mothers need more than anything is to be surrounded by married fathers in others' homes,
Mhm.
so that those young boys can see what the good life is, can see what a responsible male role model is, can see how you're supposed to be a protector, be a provider, and be a man. And so when you have these neighborhoods where these boys are growing up and there are no married men in a household providing and protecting, they have no role model. And it's so hard to create a model for masculinity uh, when you have no role models. And so really that I think gives you the most hope is that if we can just get more married fathers into homes, we don't have to get them to every home. If we get them to
Right.
more homes, then boys will see that example and they'll be able to emulate that, and it will help everyone.
And there was a Brookings Institute study, I think it was with UPenn, that showed that the states that had the most traditional nuclear families were the ones that were financially best off.
Yeah.
So there's something about that strong family that creates that strong neighborhood and community, which is a foundation for a strong nation.
Absolutely. 100%.
Well, I just want to thank you for your contribution. I hope people will go out and make sure that they purchase the book and read it and tell other people about it, because we need to bring marriage back. We need to bring strong families back. We need to stop fighting each other. We need to bring a sense of community back where, we're friends and neighbors and colleagues, not enemies because we have a different yard sign. And I think
Exactly.
that makes a big difference for America. So thank you for your contribution. So glad that you were able to be with us today for this fascinating discussion about the American family. As you know, this is a subject that has been of great concern for me. And the latest book that I wrote along with my wife was called The Perilous Fight: Overcoming Our Culture's War on the American Family. It's a big issue and something we really need to be thinking about and addressing seriously. And Karl Marx and the communists and the socialists, they do not value the family. They want God out, they want family out, and they want government to be the central focus of our lives. In the recent election, the people have shown that they're a lot smarter than anybody thinks they are. And they're not just buying a bunch of gaslighting. And they're looking for themselves. They see that we're deteriorating as a society as we throw away our values. Our values, American solid values, including family, were tremendous. And it's the reason that we rose from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world in record time. It was not a coincidence. It was because of our values, our foundation. And we need to remember that. We need to make sure we pass it on to the next generations. And that's it for today. Thank you for being with us. Make sure you rate us, review us. Wherever you get your podcast, make sure you listen to the back issues also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And tell everybody about what's going on with this podcast. Common sense. That's what we're talking about. Common sense. We can bring it back, and we don't have to be enemies. We can work together and create an environment that is supportive of thriving for every single group. And remember the cornerstone principles: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.